Okay, well, thank you. We'll have a few minutes for questions here, I think, before we have to wrap up. But one piece I want to add to the discussion here is that a great deal of the short line railroads in the state of Texas are in the rural areas. So when we think about where TxDOT gets their money to be able to improve roads and things, a great majority of that's going to go into your heavy metropolitan areas and near the ports and things, which is appropriate when you're looking at what we need to do for roads to move people and freight. But for rural Texas to be competitive, for them to have a chance at economic development, they need short line railroads. We bring a competitive edge to the marketplace. We bring private investment there to help them. And we are a major cause of new companies coming to those rural areas and along our railroads. It's a big deal. And so anything we can do that spurs incremental investment and helps make it happen is important. And not all of our railroad owners are corporations or multi-railroad holding companies. Many of them are just, they own one railroad and they've had it in their family a long time. Capital is hard to come by for some of these folks. So this is important to look at in the big picture of where we go in the state of Texas to move freight and spread economic development out across the state. So with that being said, we got a couple of minutes that we can answer some questions. Mr. Hefner.
One of these is really directed to the short line owners. The other is maybe more. Well, let me ask the questions. The first question is, where does Texas rank in comparison to other states that do have some sort of freight rail program? Is it in the middle? Is it towards the bottom? I know it's not at the top. The other question is really directed to the three short line holding companies, of which I guess there are two speaking today, and that is, to what extent do you have traffic that originates on one of your controlled short lines and moves to the other controlled short line? So in effect, you're bridging over a Class 1 railroad.
I would say Texas ranks towards the bottom in terms of, partnering with the state DOT to do projects. I'm just finishing a bridge project in Ohio that they're helping us repair our bridges on a railroad that we took over from a Class 1, and they're happy to give us $300,000 to match our $300,000, a 50% grant program, 50% match program. So, Texas just doesn't have anything, so it's near the bottom. In terms of traffic that originates on one of our short lines and ends up on another, I know there are examples of that happens here at Watco. I just can't speak to them off the top of my head. Maybe you guys can.
I would agree with what Laura said. I think that Texas, I wouldn't put it at the dead bottom of anything, because it's a very business-friendly state with people who are interested in helping grow the economy. And we've seen that. We've seen the example of TxDOT and how they have put so much effort in their Texas Freight Advisory Group and their rail plan, and they want to grow. I think the trouble is trying to pluck a lot of the funding out of the highways, which are very prominent. So I wouldn't put it near the bottom, but it's not ranking at the top in terms of investments geared towards small railroads. Same again with Laura. We have examples of that. I think we have a coal move originating out of the PRB that comes down to Oklahoma. I don't know what, I couldn't give you a percentage of moves that do that, but I can tell you that we're actively looking for those opportunities, because to an extent that we can touch it twice, that's better revenue for us.
We have one in the back, and then we have one up here.
Well, this is just a comment for the political side. You've got to remember, a tax credit doesn't have any real net cost to the budget. It requires no new appropriation. It is simply a change in the timing in which the benefit is realized. You can, after all, carry a tax credit forward for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, up to 15 years. So that reduction in tax revenue is already baked in. And it seems to me it's very important when you're dealing with, quote, conservative legislators to make sure they understand that you are not taking a new appropriation, you are merely changing the timing of a benefit. And with federal funds at roughly 1%, the cost, if you discount it, is trivial. So I think we have a very strong case, and we just need to educate people both at the federal and the state level as to the fact that there isn't any budget impact.
Thank you for your comments. Up in front here.
I have a question, and I'm only about half snarky on this one. But when you go into the lieutenant governor's office, how receptive are they? I mean, they seem to be spending so much time on worrying about who goes to what bathroom in this state that I really do wonder about the people who are big on the lieutenant governor's agenda, I guess it is, as to, do they see the big picture here about business?
When we walked in there, and I assume the bathroom part is the snarky part of that comment, not us being in there. So when we walked in there, we laid out our pitch to him. He was a little bit hesitant on the idea because Shortline had never been in there. He had never heard of the concept. So it's basically someone knocking on his door at home trying to sell him like a Cutco knife, right? He wasn't really into it at first, but as we laid out the business case for investment in infrastructure and improvement to local economies and rail transportation, he warmed to it, and toward the end was guiding us on how he thought we should go about getting it passed. So I think the broader argument here is that there is a good story to tell, and we don't have enough hours in the day to tell it. So we just need to continue to push forward that way.
Another example of that is, when we went down to Austin last year, there was multiple times we would go into a representative's office and tell them that there's a short line in their district and they didn't know. And so another way to answer that is yes, there's a lot of educating that we have to do this year before we go into 2019.
Bill.
I want to congratulate you on your efforts there. I've been trying to urge the Short Line Association to do that for a number of years. But I think you've made the first initial thrust into the legislature. You've also got to have parallel thrusts into the governor's office of economic development and sell that. You've also got to work with TxDOT and the Texas Transportation Institute. They did a study back in 2012, 2013, and I think they renewed it recently, where they looked at how Texas compared to the other states, where the other states, 34 of them, had one or more programs associated with short line railroads or for railroads themselves, either a loan program or a direct grant program or a combination program. If certain thresholds, it was a loan, but if you meant certain thresholds for employment and things like that, then they would turn it into an outright grant. In other words, you didn't have to pay back the loan. So I think that study needs to be refreshed, and it may have been 2 years ago, but that needs to be published and it needs to get to the legislatures so that you have that going with it as part of the evidence of what the bonus. Texas wants to be competitive. We don't want anybody to beat us out. If Ohio's beating us out for a new facility of some sort, that's not going to play well in Texas. So anyway, congratulations. You've started. You've got a long road.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we have one back here.
I would defer any comments with respect to the current composition of the Lieutenant Governor's office or the State Senate. I would, however, pose one question with respect to the tax credit analysis. Your numbers reflecting a $10 million tax credit devolving into a $40 million benefit in Oklahoma, I think those are interesting numbers. Do you have any numbers with respect to the number of jobs created or the direct economic impact insofar as revenue to the state of Texas, either in the form of the business tax or sales tax? Is that data being developed? Because if it is, it will help you substantially within your efforts in Austin.
I think my colleague Ryan's going to answer that a little bit, but part of the short line story is that short line railroads were created when, but for the legacy railroads that were always short lines, were created out of Class 1 railroads that decided to either close or sell off their branch lines. And so these small businesses came in and took over these lines and found them to be in very questionable condition to continue operations safely. Watco's very first short line became a short line because we were served at a mechanical shop in Kansas. We're headquartered in Kansas. And our railcar shop was no longer going to be served by the Union Pacific. And so our owners were smart enough to go talk to the good folks at Union Pacific and ask to buy the railroad, buy the track that connected them to the main line of Union Pacific. And so they said yes, and so it was our first short line, and it was Union Pacific's first short line. And those tracks, just like when you sell your house, you don't sell it in top condition, you sell it in as-is shape. And so for us to compete in the marketplace, in a very competitive transportation marketplace, we've got to maintain our tracks and be able to carry the heavier car weights, the industry standard of 286,000 pounds. And so that's just part of the story. You know, we work every day to try to get our tracks in the best shape to be able to handle. I mean, so many of our railroads, we don't carry the industry standard. We can operate at 10 miles an hour. You know, to invest in a track infrastructure that allows us to run at 25 miles an hour at 286,000 pounds takes millions of dollars. And so, you know, we think this is an opportunity to level the playing field when it comes to modal equity, especially here in Texas when there's just not a program. And you have a very good point, sir, about the economic benefits. You know, it's really about keeping these railroads open and continuing to serve the businesses that they had always served, you know, prior to the change in ownership. And I'll let Ryan answer about some of the...
Well, I think, thank you for the question, and I think you're hitting on a very critical point in this whole sales process, if you will. There's not really good economic impact data that's attached to some of this stuff. We've got very good anecdotal evidence of a particular business locating along the railroad because of track improvements that they were able to make and jobs created on it. So I think collectively we've been talking about how's the best way to gather that data so that when we go talk to the elected representatives of the state of Texas, that we've got a pretty succinct message and we can articulate what we think the impact can be. But I do think, thankfully, we've got a baseline of the last 12 years of 45G tax credit that can help us articulate that a little bit. So I don't have the answer for you today on that, other than we're working on it because we think it's critical. And frankly, we had one of the best meetings we had early on was we went to see Representative Hugh Shine, represents Temple, Texas, and they've got a small short line, and we weren't even like 30 seconds into the meeting, and he goes, "I get it. I've got a short line in my district, and I know the people." And so when we were able to pull out a map and make a connection, they say, "Oh God, Joe's feed mill depends on the short line railroad, and I know somebody that works there." When we were able to connect the dots on stories like that, this really made it an easy yes for folks. And so I think the effort you're going to see out of the short lines as we lead up to 2019 is get to know your legislators, get to know their staff, repeat. And then when we formulate the plan and the ask, there's a relationship in place. And if you can enlist the shippers and the local economic developers, and you've got this broad base of support, I mean, I think this will have a lot of steam. So,
Just a quick comment. That's a great question. Excuse me. That's a great question. And just like Ryan said, we're working to get better data, but TxDOT has provided some studies that have given us some great economic data, at least for baseline, as much as we can get for now, and that includes indirect, direct jobs, as well as economic output. So if you have any questions about that, we can refer you to that afterwards.
John.
One comment. For those of us in the East who had the good fortune to have the Penn Central bankruptcy, those in the Midwest who had the Rock Island and the Milwaukee bankruptcies, the Delaware and Hudson, Boston and Maine, I think the states with the strongest programs like South Dakota, many of the Midwestern states, the Northeastern states, the reason why those states have strong programs is that there was substantial either bankruptcy or, in the case of like North Carolina, abandonment activity. The unfortunate thing for Texas is you have two very strong Class 1 railroads, and I guess I'd call the KCS strong too. So that's, you know, it's good news and bad news.
So one of the things I want to touch on as we wrap up is that part of our agenda with the Short Line Association is also to build very strong relationships inside of TxDOT. We have a new rail director. I guess he's in year 2 now, and so we want to work very closely with him and with his team and with all of the officials at TxDOT to be sure that we can help provide them the right information and work closely with them to get the most out of their freight plan dollars, the most return on investment. Because at the end of the day, I mean, whether you're a businessman or you work inside of the state government, we all are concerned about the return on the investment of the dollars that we spend. And I think we have a great solution to help make that happen for the state of Texas long term. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.